Hey everybody, welcome back to 10% True. This is the second in a short series of videos I'm making in conjunction with DCS F-15E Strike Eagle, the module by Razbam. I've teamed with Razbam and with Eagle Dynamics to provide everybody who buys a copy of the module with a free copy of my 2003 Strike Eagle book. That book is 100,000 words, about 150 color images, 191 pages, and is going to be provided to you in your documentation folder when you install the module as a PDF or an ebook. It tells the story of the Strike Eagle from 1978 to 2003, and I was really lucky to be able to go to Boeing's archives in St. Louis and to go through all of their unclassified material, to interview a range of retirees who were responsible for bringing that Strike Eagle concept to fruition, and a number of visits to various Strike Eagle units around the world to interview pilots and wizzos who had flown the aircraft in combat. So their narratives and their stories are all included in the book, and I hope that you enjoy it. Just a little bit of housekeeping before I let you get on with enjoying the next video. The first is that I'm not a video maker, so the next video is around the development of the cockpit. It's an abridged version of the story that I tell in the book, and you can go to the first and second chapters if you want to read the full story behind how that cockpit was developed. But it does basically involve me panning around the cockpit quite a bit, so please don't go too hard on me in terms of my skills as a video maker. Perhaps just enjoy some of the history and some of the descriptions behind the development and the cockpit as it stood in around about 2003. Also, if you've got a little bit of extra time, I've got about 10 or so hours of Strike Eagle pilot and wizzo interviews on this channel, and there's a playlist that I'll put in the description if you want to go and listen to those. But they're really interesting, and they tell the story of combat in the Balkans, combat in Iraq in 2003, and some of the Syria operations, the more recent operations that the Strike Eagle has undertaken in that part of the world. So if you've got some time spare, go and have a look at that. Finally, I've teamed with Sedlow, who is a fantastic mission designer, has put together some free campaigns, including the Bold Cheetah campaign for DCS, which I know you can download from the eStore, and he's creating a 10% True Strike Eagle mission. So we'll make that available for free nearer the time when the module comes out. Anyway, that's enough from me on this topic. Here's the video. I hope you enjoy. The Strike Eagle cockpit was developed over a number of years, starting with Macaire's AFCD, Advanced Fighter Capability Demonstrator, and eventually maturing into a production standard configuration at the end of the dual-role fighter competition of the mid-1980s. What resulted was, for the time, an advanced design that incorporated new technologies, enhanced existing ones, and created an air-to-ground optimized working environment for the Strike Eagle's two-man crew. The AFCD was a sort of forerunner to the F-15E, and it had started the ball rolling with the introduction of hand controllers and cathode ray tube displays in the rear cockpit. It was operational US Air Force crews involved in the DRF competition, though, who had the most influential input into the final layout and operation of the crew compartment. The new front cockpit was radically different from that found in any previous F-15 variants. The HUD had been replaced by a Kaiser IR2394 wide field of view system. Squatting above the control panel, it provided a 21 degree by 28 degree field of view and could display raster and stroke imagery. In a break with previous HUD units, the combining glass and optics were not heavily framed, but relied on curvature and solid base mounting to maintain their strength. A three-way declutter switch was included, which could progressively remove symbology from the HUD should the amount of information being displayed become excessive. Articulating pitch ladders were used for the first time. The pitch ladder was a visual aid to determine the aircraft's attitude, specifically roll and pitch, relative to the horizon. It displayed increments of 5 degrees as solid or dashed lines above or below the horizon, respectively. The articulation came in the form of the pitch lines being angled towards the horizon at half of the angle the pitch line represented. So the 40-degree positive pitch line would angle 20 degrees down. The 60-degree negative pitch line would angle 30 degrees upwards. A sky pointer function was also incorporated into the ladder, and this too was a first-time feature. Small ticks at the end of each ladder point towards the horizon. These two features were extremely useful for unusual attitude recoveries without having to look back down into the cockpit. The new HUD worked extremely well in the sun, although the pilot could always call up a HUD repeater in his MPD if the sun was too bright. And for combat, the new HUD was not only capable of displaying a huge amount of flight and navigational data, but would also display key pieces of information necessary for air-to-air and air-to-ground engagements. Directly below and in line with the HUD, Macaire installed a new upfront control panel, or UFC. This provided direct control of the INS, the TACAN, the autopilot, TF, IFF, UHF radios, NAV-FLIR, air-to-ground stores delivery bias, and JTIDs. The F-15E has two UFCs, one in each cockpit, and they run off separate avionics interface units, or processors, in order to add a layer of system redundancy. Macaire also added two grey knobs either side of each UFC to either tune the aircraft's two Honeywell ARC 164 UHF transceiver radios or to switch them between preset frequencies. KY-58 HAVQuick2 jam-resistant auxiliary radios were also installed on the F-15E, and this too was accessed through the UFC. In the front cockpit, and flanking the UFC below and to the left and right, Macaire installed three Honeywell multi-purpose displays, two monochrome and one colour. The colour display was referred to as the MPCD and was centrally mounted in front of the control stick. The MPDs were a direct replacement for traditional cockpit instrumentation. Each had 20 push buttons numbered anti-clockwise from left to right for ease of use, and crews soon became accustomed to passing on tuition or advice in PB format. Press PB9, then hit PB18 and select PB4. The MPDs could be programmed prior to flight for each master mode and to scroll through pages at the touch of a button in whichever order best suited the operator. This custom programming allowed the pilots and whizzos to develop their own habit patterns. They knew that entering an air-to-air mode, for example, would bring up pages they most wanted to see. It also allowed them to instinctively reach another page by simply toggling a stick-mounted switch a certain number of times according to the hierarchy they'd programmed into the multipurpose display processor. A small set of backup mechanical flight instruments occupied a space below the left MPD, and the engine instruments ordinarily found on the right side of the cockpit were replaced by another, smaller, monochrome LCD known as the engine monitor display. The EMD provided the same information as the older mechanical gauges, but in a graphical format similar to that found in the F-18 Hornet. Electronic Attitude Director Indicator and Horizontal Situational Indicator were display formats that could be called up on any of the MPDs to provide navigation and situational data in lieu of full-sized analog instrumentation. A newly designed, conventionally mounted control stick and two throttles were installed to fully exploit the lessons learned in the art of hands-on throttle and stick. The pre-MSIP F-15A through D had basic HOTAS, but the F-15E took this several stages further. The stick played host to no fewer than 7 levers or buttons. 3 of these were 5-way switches, one a 2-stage trigger, and the others carried single-position detents. Depending on the master mode, radar mode, weapons mode, and displays selected, each switch position had its own separate function. By way of an example, the castle switch, mounted centrally on the top of the stick, was the primary method of changing displays without having to touch any of the PBs. Pressing the switch down and then in the direction of the MPD of interest caused the switch to take command of that display. Pressing it left or right would then scroll through the displays in the order in which they had been programmed into the MPDP. Pressing a button on the throttle and simultaneously pressing the castle switch would then drive the NAV-FLIR into snap look mode. Pressing the master caution light and then simultaneously matching the castle switch left, right or aft would cause the bit page to appear on the chosen MPD. In air-to-air master mode, pressing the switch forward automatically jumped the system to air-to-ground, causing the displays to reconfigure automatically. You get the idea. The split throttles carried their own assortment of HOTAS switches. From left to right were a chaff flare switch, a rotary dial that controlled the elevation of the radar antenna, a single position switch to fire the target pod laser, an isometric transducer switch called the target designator control, a 4-way coolie hat, a 3-position microphone switch, a 3-position speed brake switch, a 3-position boat switch, and a weapon switch that accommodated 3 positions: gun, short-range missile, and medium-range missile. The Wizzo's office featured an additional MPCD on each side, bringing the total number of displays in the rear cockpit to 4. A backup set of analog flight instruments was duplicated, and these ran beneath the MPDs. Above the instrument coning was the so-called sissy bar, onto which the Wizzo could place his hand to better allow him to twist in his seat to look behind the aircraft. Below this was an elongated annunciator panel which displayed caution lights and the master caution light. The Wizzo was provided with a set of simple throttles and a control stick identical to that found in previous F-15s. Sensor and system control was instead accomplished through hand controllers on the left and right consoles. Left-hand controller and right-hand controller HOTAS was even more complex than that found in the front seat, and each controller was dedicated to manipulating the 2 MPDs on its side of the aircraft, so the left-hand controller ran the left MPDs and the right-hand controller controlled those on the right. Cranked in appearance, the controllers were firmly mounted to fixing plates, as all sensor control was achieved through manipulation of the switches. Each featured a 3-way momentary slide switch for chaff flare or IFF activation, a 4-way coolie switch for MPD page scrolling, a 5-way castle switch that ran many of the sensor attack functions, a TDC identical to that in the front seat, a 2-stage trigger, a spring-loaded laser fire button, and a 4-way mode reject switch. Thanks for tuning in to 10% True. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Feel free to subscribe, and if you're on YouTube, hit the bell button to make sure you get notified of the next episode. Thanks and take care.